Hello and welcome to the Peak and Roll podcast. I'm your host, DJ Peak. We're joined by Caleb Mushinski, our co-host, yet again. Very excited for what we're going to be talking about today. And as you can see at the bottom, if you're on YouTube or if you're listening, the agenda is to talk about Tobe Awaka and how he might have an increased role for Tennessee this year after coming off an excellent run for the FIBA U19 World Cup. We're also going to be talking about the Summer League winners and losers. And as we're recording, the Rockets are getting blown out by the Cleveland Cavaliers, 34-16, and Whitmore is still scoreless, shooting 0 for 6 so far. And looking through their box score, it's a pretty rough night. There's only 5 field goals made for their starting unit, and that's between 2 players, and one of them has 4 of them. So I think that one's going to be a gift wrap pretty nicely for us. So with Whitmore, we're not going to be taking into account what's happening right now, because that's a single game, and he's been fantastic this summer league.
I just want to say one thing. It just updated. He's now 1 for 7. He made a 3-pointer.
Let's go, Cam. But we're going to be talking maybe about the Rockets in a little bit. I don't know if we have them on our list, but we definitely could have a little bit of Rockets chatter later. But Caleb, I'm really tired. I'm just going to say that. So this past weekend was kind of a camping trip for me and my college friends. They all drove up to the northern Michigan homestead of where I live, and we all camped in my front yard. So that was a good time.
Yeah, I feel you too. I had a pretty busy weekend too, hanging with family, and then yesterday driving from Alpena back to Travers. I thought I wasn't gonna make it when I got to the casino and out in Acme, because I thought I was just gonna pass out from just being tired. So
I know, and we were supposed to record yesterday. So usually our uploads are uploaded, I think, Monday mornings or either Sunday night, but this one's probably going to be uploaded either Monday night or Tuesday morning. I have no clue yet. It depends on how much work I want to do tonight.
Good call on our end for postponing it, though. I'm really glad we did. There's no way I could have done one of these yesterday.
And if we tried, it would have been probably the worst one
probably
we would have done. But getting right into it, Caleb, we already mentioned at the top that Tobe Awaka is kind of almost guaranteed a role increase in Tennessee after after Chris Ledlum is going to transfer. And that's even before playing a game for them. He's from Harvard, committed in May, but there's probably a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on that's led to him to enter the transfer portal. So Caleb, I want you to talk a little bit about what this transfer means for Tobe Awaka, and also how this can help Tobe Awaka in general.
Well, for starters, I think it was expected that Chris Ledlum will play a lot of small ball for Tennessee upcoming this year. He was one of the most highly touted grad transfers coming out this year. I don't know, he was probably like top 30 or top 40. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but all kinds of schools were reaching out for him. I was really hoping too. Michigan even had their name in the pot for a bit, but ultimately he chose Tennessee, which I was really thrilled about because I thought that was a great fit for him before I knew a lot about what Tobe Awaka was going to do at the FIBA U19. However, now Ledlum is now entering the transfer portal again. I'm not really sure why. There could be some behind the scenes stuff, but it will be better for Awaka because looking at Tennessee going into next year, they have 2 returning bigs in him and also their starting center, Jonas Idu. They also have 2 4-star post commits coming in as well, and JP Estrella and Cade Phillips. And typically, too, Rick Barnes doesn't play his young guys too much right away. But one thing that Tennessee still concerns me is they have a lot of guards and wings coming back who are pretty good size, like 6'5", 6'6" players. So he might even at some point either run those guys and then I do it at the 5, or they can run Awaka at the 5. So be interesting to see what happens next year.
Yeah. So do you have any more insight on Ledlum?
Well, the one that's really intriguing to me is I saw a Kansas-based article say, should they go after Ledlum? Because they just had a decommit from one of their players, Marcus Adams Jr., were classified from 2024 into 23, was still considered like a top 50 recruit. However, he just requested his national letter of intent to be released. So who knows? Maybe that now opens up that spot for Ledlum. I'm not really sure where he fits really in Kansas's rotation off the top of my head, just because they already brought in a bunch of different transfers and plus some recruits as well. However, though, another team to watch out too is Indiana, because they were really going after him when he was originally being recruited. However, since then they've brought in Mackenzie Mbako, who we've talked about him before on our pod. He's projected first rounder by most likely next year. So I don't know. Indiana might have their forward spot filled out already, but you never know. They could reach out to him.
Yeah, and this was probably the best thing for Tobe Awaka because it carves out a clear role. And maybe Ledlam was looking at what was happening U19 and thinking,
Got
maybe
scared.
this Awaka guy is going to get a lot of run. Looking at some of the percentiles from the U19 tournament, Awaka was the 100th percentile for offensive boards. So he was the best rebounder out there. He was 96 percentile for the contested field goal percentage stat, 93rd for screen assists, 95th for field goal percentage, and 84th for points. Also, transition field goal percentage as the play type. These stats are all coming from Antonio Diaz _PT, and that's on Twitter. And that was insane to actually look at that and see that he was one of the most dominant inside players for the entire World Cup in the world.
And the numbers may not speak for itself with some of the more, flashier numbers, but it's those advanced statistics like that that really show how important he was on a team. I mean, looking at it from just a standard perspective, looking through stats, you can see the rebounding is obviously great, but once you really see what he brings on the floor, then that's when the advanced statistics start to make sense.
Yes, and I think this is a prime candidate of people that I don't want to say casual fans because I'm not talking down about anybody, but there's a lot of people that won't notice the importance of him. But I think if anybody was watching that U19 tournament, they would have noticed the impact that he had. Does this possibly change any of his draft projection?
Like I said, Tennessee is going to be a weird team next year. I think they're too guard heavy, where there's going to be too much focus on their wings and their guards rather than their bigs. But Awaka will still have people looking at him, thinking this could be a guy in 25 for sure.
Especially because you're talking about the advanced statistics with him, and he does all the things you want from an off-ball player. So I think there's teams that in the late first or early second could really utilize someone like that who doesn't need the ball in his hands, that they know is going to go out there and just be a bruiser every single night.
The SEC also has a ton of real good big man talent as well next year.
Good challenge for him.
Hopefully with that kind of competition, and the SEC has been one of the better leagues now for the past few years. Last year was a bit of a down year because there was pretty much half the league went under coaching changes. So it was a bit of a rebuild year for most teams last season. But I still think Awaka, once he plays against some of those high D1 level guys, and if he does what he does against FIBA U19, that'll just only benefit him for the future.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those high energy guys also in the summer league. I would say that's a smooth transition into talking about the summer league winners. And we made a list of a lot of different teams. I don't know how in depth we need to get with all of them because we've talked a little bit about some of them in last episode and maybe even the one before that. But coming up first, I think it's necessary to bring up the Cleveland Cavaliers. They have had one of the best summers for a team that I think a lot of people looked at and said, I don't know, coming into Summer League, because a lot of teams really rely on their first round picks to really carry them through this exhibition. But they're relying on a second round pick in Imani Bates and a couple of their two-way guys. And who were they? Craig Porter Jr. and Isaiah Mobley, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And a lot of people look at Isaiah Mobley as just the other Mobley brother, or he was picked by the Cavs just to make Mobley happy. But being with the Herd last year, the affiliate, the G League affiliate for the Cavs last year, he had a really good role for them, and he's looking to increase on that. It's kind of an all-around Swiss Army knife.
I've always liked Isaiah Mobley too. I mean, people forget he's only a year older than Evan in class-wise, but he was also too. People may not realize, but he was also a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. I mean, he was a top 20 player nationally in his class. Played with Evan in high school. I've always looked at Isaiah Mobley as more of a more complete offensive player than what Evan is. He's already got the jump shot down, I think, more advanced than what we would want Evan Mobley to have. And also, too, he's a much better playmaker for others.
Yeah.
Obviously, the physical genes got more to Evan rather than Isaiah with athleticism and, just freakish long length, be able to guard perimeters. But Isaiah Mobley still holds his own on defense. But that's just always someone that I really have liked. And I knew, too, last year he was going to be a second-round draft pick, which, in what a coincidence, he made his way to the Cavaliers.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing with him is he led the team, or is currently leading the team in assists per game. So
Hmm.
he's kind of being that facilitator. And I think the big thing is, mentioned a little bit ago, he played for the Herd last year. He had a game winner. Did you see that game winner a few games ago?
I did not know. I haven't seen that.
I feel like it's doing a disservice to not even mention who it was against, but I was reading an article about it earlier today, and it's just really interesting to see because his coach that's coaching right now was also his coach last year in the G League.
Hmm.
So maybe it was a set play that they used before, but he just looks very comfortable out there amongst these other summer league guys and two-way guys and rookies, and it's something where I don't know if he's going to be able to be an NBA player in the actual league playing consistent minutes right now, but I definitely think in the near future he could be.
Well, considering too, they just traded away Lamar Stevens. Now you're down a power forward. They were even down a power forward when they just gave Kevin Love away for free last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also just traded away CD Osman to another forward they have. So who knows? Maybe Mobley could move up now that they see him in summer league and what he did for the G League.
Yeah, this team, like I said, is a little bit underrated. Like Sam Merrill went absolutely nuclear a couple games ago, hitting every single shot. The rim looked like an ocean to him. Just a fantastic outburst for him. And he's a guy who's been around the league for a little bit, and he could easily take up some sort of rotational spot for this Cavaliers team.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his recruiting profile from Utah State, that's what he was one of the best scorers in the country when it was his final year of college basketball, and it's now he's the best scorer right now currently for Cleveland.
Yeah, that's what is it? 43% on 11 attempts per game from deep. So that is lethal. That's NBA level. And
And
they didn't shut him down.
not only that, I have it pulled up too. 13.5 attempts in the field, 11 of those are from
Yeah.
three. So
And that's the guy who knows his role.
that's I was just saying that's the definition of know your role.
And Amani Bates is a guy who a lot of people thought might not know his role. And they thought he maybe should go undrafted. And I think even getting taken in the second round was a huge eye opener for him. And the fact that he's not the best anymore. He's not the best in his class. He's not the best guy when he steps on the floor. And he comes in with that mindset, but he's more humbled. And I really think that this is an experience for him that really might change his perception on things and might help him kind of open his eyes and realize I need to be more serious about my craft. I need to go out there and give everything 110%. And it can't just be about me. And I think he's done a really good job at that. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's a few missed reads here or there. He's not passing the ball to who he needs to pass it to. But I think he's had a really good summer league, shooting 41% off 8 attempts from three. And when you look at the Cavaliers, what is their most lacking position?
The Isaac Okoro position at the 3 spot.
Yeah, and I looked at that when he was drafted and said, okay, if Amani Bates can kind of go back to uh, what he was projected to be, and he can actually become that, he's
Hmm.
the perfect fit on this Cleveland team. He's a guy who can create his own shot. He's kind of a Brandon Ingram-esque player to me.
Yeah.
Can create his own shot, is lengthy and wiry. He probably can be better defensively once he gets used to the systems a little bit more. But he can shoot the three. And next to Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell and kickouts from Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, he's going to have a really good career. And people might look back at that and think that's the steal of the draft.
Yeah. Amani Bates to me, his thing is going to be whether or not he can accept his role, like you mentioned. I thought, and this is just being the butthurt Michigan State fan,
Yeah.
but that would have been a perfect team. Izzo would have been the perfect coach where it's a know your role
Mm-hmm.
kind of guy because he's never let guys outshine each other. They just played to who they were. And I really think for him going to Memphis as a freshman and playing point guard for Penny Hardaway was just a total disaster for him,
Yeah.
especially for a kid who should have still been in high school, no matter how good he was. That was not a team that was built around him to be a point guard and to be a primary guy. At least going back to Eastern Michigan, I mean, he was the guy there, but he was also closer to home, trying to get things right and get back on track. But now, I mean, like you said, it's not like too that for what 8 attempts per game, he's making 41% of his three.
Yeah.
It's not like he's taking too many shots. I mean, he leads the team in field goal attempts per game throughout 5 games, excluding the one they're playing right now. But still,
Mm-hmm.
to shoot 43, 41, And then maybe you would like to see more free throws just because, and you mentioned defensively too. I know he's a little bit undersized physically, doesn't really have ideal strength just yet, but that'll come to him eventually when he keeps developing. People remember that he should technically have been a freshman in high school or freshman in college this past year.
Yeah.
So he's still fairly young and he has lots of room to grow.
Yeah. And looking at the game right now, he's shooting 4 of 8, 2 of 5 from 3, second leading scorer on the team. Isaiah Mobley is currently 7 for 10 right now, 1 of 2 from 3. Filling the stat sheet, 17, 6, and 2 with a block.
Good
So,
Lord.
but the Rockets actually brought it back. It's 50-44 right now. Whitmore is
Oh,
3
wow.
and 9, so he made 2 in a row there. Hudgens has 8 and 6, 2 of 4 from deep. So at least they're making it a fun game. So
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of the Cavaliers?
I think we're good with everything. Like I said, my guys, Amani Bates and Isaiah Mobley, were two guys I'm excited to see. Also, just one little quick shout out to Sharif Cooper, also too playing point guard for this team. I know he's averaging 13.5 points per game. That was a guy too that I really liked back in college as well. So good to see him still playing around. And I know it's a little tight in the guard spot now for Cleveland, but just the fact to see him still doing well is always good to see.
Exactly, especially after the disaster he had last year, Summer League led to him being waived by Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully he can find a role somewhere, even if it's just a two-way, even if he's playing in someone's G League. Hopefully he can make it back to the league. But we're going to move on to our next team, the Dallas Mavericks, who are also another team that has been really interesting to look at this summer league, led by 2 of their first-round picks in Max Prosper and Derek Lively, but also last year's first-round draft pick, Jaden Hardy. So they've had a really, like I said, kind of just an interesting way through here where I guess I didn't realize how good they would be. I mean, they finished as one of the top teams in summer league, obviously not one of the top 4, but they were 3-2, was it? Was that 4-1?
I believe 3-2. I don't have that off the top of my head right now, but
yeah, but getting into it, these guys have done exactly what they needed to do. Derek Lively has been the guy that Derek Lively is advertised to be. Guy who can get you boards, play good defense, and just be overall athletic and getting to the rim. Max Prosper has been another guy who's using his physical tools to contribute to every single game, averaging 12 points a game, 5 rebounds. The bad part about Max Prosper is his jumper is still in the works. I mean, shooting 23% from 3. I'm trying to pull up how many attempts he takes a game. Do you have that right there?
3.4.
Yeah, so it's not like it's something that he is shooting a ton of, which is probably good for him. A lot of his stuff is getting to the rim and trying to be a driver, and it's working for him. And I think another thing that makes me not worried about his jumper is he's shooting in the 80s for his free throw percentage. And usually when you can shoot well from the stripe, you're going to be able to expand that over time. And as kind of a project player, that's going to be a good development for him.
Yeah, well, look at Omax too. If you ever watched Marquette at all last year, his role pretty much was just a slasher, mid-range kind of guy. They had so many shooters in Marquette last year where you didn't really need him to be. You just had to have him be that high energy rebounder down low. If you needed him to also be one of the best defensive forwards that they had on their team. So, like you said, the jump shot's coming along. I mean, to see that he's making 82% of his free throws on 5.6 attempts, that's already a good starter for at least a mid-range game that can eventually move out further to three-point land.
And Jaden Hardy's another guy that has really impressed me, kind of embracing the role of the alpha on this team. He's the only, actually, there's 2 guys with double-digit field goal attempts, but he still leads by 7 shots a game. Not super efficient at shooting 35% from the field and 24 from 3. So you'd want to see more from him. But overall, I mean, he's been a guy that's might be building up some trade value, because I think when you look at the Mavericks and what they have, their guard position's pretty filled out, adding in Seth Curry back into the mix. I don't know what Jaden Hardy really can contribute. Maybe he could be a part of a larger deal at the deadline, figuring out exactly what they need, because when you have Luka, when you have Kyrie, you don't have any time to waste.
No. And Jaden Hardy, too, is someone when they just threw him in garbage time, he was just an instant offense type player. Like you said, this is mostly just for him getting his pretty much for this entire summer league. So you would like to see the numbers be a little bit better, especially on the 3-pointers when you're shooting 9.7 attempts for 24%. But for the most part, too, one stat that I really like is he's getting to the free throw line 11
Yeah,
attempts per
I was just
game
about to bring that
and
up.
shooting 73%. So you'd like to see that for him in a guard, especially. But just real quick, too, the other guy that you talked about in double digits, Jordan Jelly Walker, a guy who played at UAB for a while, was a very explosive guard, very wide known national name in college basketball, if you knew about him. I know the last two games is where he really picked up, but just to see him shooting to 6.8 3-point attempts, 48% from there, that's just cool to see, averaging 13 points per game on 11 shots per game. But yeah, just this was a fun Dallas team that just had a lot of real good players. I mean, even look at too like Mike Miles Jr., who was undrafted from TCU. People thought he could have been a second round pick, and just
Mhm.
to see him to contribute, they just got a bunch of fun, likable guys.
Yeah, I think Braxton Key is a name that sticks out to me as a former Pistons two-way guy, but he had a rough go.
Yeah.
We're going to keep on moving here onto the Detroit Pistons. As everybody knows, if you've listened to this program, that is mine and Caleb's favorite team. I absolutely loved what they were able to do throughout this summer league. I think game one, as we talked about before, was a little bit underwhelming, and maybe a lot of you can say very underwhelming, especially from the returning guys. But when they gave the ball and they gave the keys to Asar Thompson and Marcus Sasser, I think we all saw what those two were capable of. And those were two picks a lot of people questioned going in, because they said, why would you put a non-shooter next to Cade Cunningham? And why would you trade up for Marcus Sasser when you could have taken him at 31? And I think both of them proved exactly why people were wrong and what they can contribute. Like Asar Thompson, among rookie small forwards, was first in rebounds per game, assists per game, and steals per game. Also top 5 in points per game, blocks per game, minutes per game. So he placed top 5 in every single statistical category amongst the small forwards. And league wide, I just need you to remember that he only played 4 out of 5 games. He was tied first in total stocks, which is steals and blocks, at 16, and 6th in total rebounds at 40. And that's amongst centers. That's amongst the Livelies of the world. That's amongst the Wembys of the world. And just an overall outstanding performance for Asar, when a lot of people would talk bad about OTE, but are saying it won't translate through summer league, even though a lot of people said it won't translate through OTE, but now he's actually showing it translates to summer league. Now people are saying this won't translate to the NBA, but it's exactly what's going to happen. The stuff he showed is real. He's not showing fluky stuff like shooting 50 from 3. He's showing feel, athleticism, IQ, playmaking ability. Just everything's there for him except the jump shot.
Yeah, and that's just something I look at down the board between him, Sasser, and Ivy, and even James Wiseman too. They shot all around pretty much 25% from 3-point land. Some shot more shots than others, like Ivy and Sasser.
Mhm.
But essentially, like we mentioned before, you don't need Thompson to right away come in and shoot. That will come eventually. Do all the other winning basketball stuff at first. And
Yep.
even too, Marcus Sasser, we saw when he got the keys to the team, he drops 40 points.
Yeah. He had 9 points in that first half. And then he finished with 40, having 33, or not 33. He had, what was it in the second half? Whatever it was, whatever the math is there. But overall, just an outstanding night for Sasser in that game against Indiana.
Just real quick, and we can just probably call it because we've talked about Detroit so much, but I
Yeah.
saw a trade earlier, and this kind of coexists with Dallas, but I saw, because you mentioned Sasser drafting a backup point guard, I saw today a trade package where it was Bogdanovich and Killian for Tim Hardaway Jr. and JaVale McGee and a bunch of picks. So I don't know what went through with that, but apparently it looks like they're trying to package Killian and Bogdanovich together.
Yeah, and briefly talking about that, I think we talked about a deal like this in our first episode, where if I was the Pistons, I would try to get a JaVale McGee. I think we had this
Yeah.
exact combo. Or maybe it wasn't JaVale, maybe it
Yeah,
was
it
a
was a
center
JaVale
like
McGee,
JaVale.
but it's essentially the idea we're getting at. They need to go and get a veteran big. That way it opens up to you can ship off Bagley or Wiseman or maybe
Or
even both
both.
to
Yeah.
somewhere. Yeah,
It gives Duran the free run and without having to prioritize the development of other bigs. And
right.
Killian gets another shot somewhere else, especially on that second unit, where if he plays with a Jaden Hardy, Omax Prosper, I think he could help everyone there. Because I think when Killian's in a system where he doesn't have to try to shoot the ball, he's going to be great. Like
Yeah.
he's going to be fantastic. I think that's enough for Detroit, Caleb. I think that's enough for Detroit. So, what's a team you want to talk about?
One team I found real interesting was the Lakers with what they
Mm-hmm.
did, because you look at them not so much from, just a rebuilding perspective, but a win now. These are the guys that we thought were literally won free agency with all the moves they made.
Yeah.
And they are also a winner of Summer League. I mean, you look at second year guy Max Christie, who averaged
Mm,
19 points per game in only 3 games played, but shot splits of 45, 50, and at 6.3 attempts per game, made every single free throw that he took in Summer League. And this is just for that second set. There was like 2 games they played at first, which he was pretty much the same way, averaged like 21 in 2 games and just shot the lights out again. But also, too, something to note, 6.3 rebounds a game, 3.7 assists, 2.3 blocks per game for a
mm,
wing. So
yeah.
this was a guy that we ripped on a lot around this time last year for having a super underwhelming summer league. This year, year two, he's not messing around. He's balling out. And it's funny because they took a guy in the second round again this year named Maxwell Lewis from Pepperdine, who's pretty much the same player as Christie if you want like a player comp. And he didn't really have the most ideal summer league either, only 5.4 points per game, 32% from the field, 16% from three when he's known as a high volume shooter. But it's just, I mean, we were saying the same about Christie last year, and look what happened this year. So I'm not going to give up on
Yeah.
Maxwell Lewis. Plus, he didn't have the same role. But going on with some of their other guys too, Jalen Hood Shafino was someone originally I said that did not make any sense to the Lakers. And I think I'm starting to, once you see how their free agency played out and how he's been playing in Summer League, maybe not so much from a shooting standpoint, but just from being the lead guard, I think they made the right pick there at 17 for the future, especially if they want to take all their big contracts like D'Lo and they want to move him somewhere. That's
Mm-hmm.
someone I think could play very well next to LeBron, could learn a lot from LeBron James. And then just even their two-way guys. I mean, Colin Castleton and Demoy Hodge, the two rookie two-way guys for this year, plus second-year guy Cole Swider. I mean, all of them average double digits. Demoy Hodge 15.4, Cole Swider 15.2, Castleton 13.4 points and 10.2 rebounds. All of them shooting great splits too. I mean, Castleton doesn't really shoot threes, but you look at someone like Cole Swider, who's making 42% on 8 threes a game. Demoy Hodge making 40 on 9.4. I don't see how the Lakers are not a winner of Summer League despite record.
Yeah, and you have to look at that. And this is going to come up when we talk about the Nuggets next, is that you look at the Lakers and they're a team that you didn't really expect to be a top team in Summer League because of the guys they have. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they have Jalen Hood Shafino, but people thought he might take a little bit more time to become the player people think he can be. And it's similar to the Cavs in a way where the Lakers are in a great position without players drafted super early.
Right.
And it's a thing where with the new CBA, and we talk about this, I think, every single episode, these steals, diamonds in the roughs are so valuable because uh, you need these these small contracts on your team for guys who can contribute. So I look at a lot of these guys, and I don't know, maybe 2, 3 of them that might not make the Lakers roster might make a different roster. I think an example of that would be if you look at Duncan Robinson a few years ago, played in the summer league for the Lakers, balled out and played in Miami. So there wasn't enough room in the Lakers, even though they probably could have made room for Duncan Robinson if they knew what he was going to be. But is there any guy here, Caleb, that you think maybe could end up somewhere else?
Maybe Cole Swider because he's been there for 2 years already now. He's pretty much just a 3-point specialist, 3-and-D
Mm-hmm.
guy. But I could see like Max Christie and then also Jalen Hood Shafino making the rotation possibly. I think they have the highest chances of everyone considering how thin the point guard spot. I mean, LeBron
Mm-hmm.
James is the point guard, but you got to have nights where you rest.
Yeah.
And I just keep thinking too, we talk about the CBA. They have the Cavaliers. They spent all this money. So there's just accumulating salary. If they want to make a big splash before a trade deadline, that's a team with a bunch of young assets, maybe not so
Mm-hmm.
much draft picks, but they have the contracts to put stuff together. They have young players to throw in too. They're
Yeah.
just a team to watch, especially now after Summer League.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that 100%. And that brings us into the team I said we were going to talk about next, the Denver Nuggets. They went 2-3, so they weren't necessarily the best overall from a team standpoint. They were pretty far away from making those top 4 playoffs. I mean, but you look at like Hunter Tyson, Strother,
Lord.
guys that I think that started a little bit slower, but we were able to pick it up and kind of finish strong. And so Denver now has more of these assets that they have at their disposal. You look at Christian Braun was able to replace that Bruce Brown role on a smaller contract. And who knows, maybe one of these guys could replace somebody else in the coming future.
I still keep saying Jalen Pickett's going to be the new Bruce Brown for them. You have the shorter guard who does everything for him. Just some of his stats: 12 points per game, 53 and 42% shooting, but also 4 rebounds, 5.6 assists, 1.2 steals, and a block per game. That just sounds like a Bruce Brown stat line right there.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter Tyson's just shooting the absolute lights out all throughout the tournament. 54, 50, and 87% splits. Julian Strother, you mentioned, he started slow, but his last 2-3 games, he really picked it up, got himself to 18 points per game. You look at Peyton Watson, too, a guy from UCLA who didn't really think that people were going to take him in the first round just because of how limited he played, how young he was. Plus 2, just with the limited shooting as well, very raw player. 2 games, he averages 19 points per game, along with a steal and a half and a block and a half per game. 3-point shots really not there. 2.5 attempts on 20% shooting. But that's someone, too, who could very well move up in the rotation this year. It's just we keep saying the Nuggets have all of these veteran young guys that just come in and play day one.
Yep. And those, like I said, are going to be assets for them because if they're not playing for them, they might be playing somewhere else and can get Denver some sort of compensation. That's the word I'm looking for there. But Caleb, there's one more team that I want to talk about before we get to the kind of losers of Summer League. That's the Oklahoma City Thunder.
I just don't get it. They just have asset upon asset upon asset upon asset.
They will forever.
They pretty much will. And it's just funny because they played 8 games total. They played in the Salt Lake City League, which was 3 games plus this. They went 5-3 overall. My favorite headline is Chet's back.
Yeah.
Because we missed out on Chet Holmgren, number 2 overall pick in 22 for an entire season. And now when you see him come back, he does look, people say he only put like 13 pounds of muscle, but you can definitely tell he looks a little bit more bigger than he did last year. He doesn't look as frail. In just 2 games, he had 20 points per game, 9.5 rebounds, 3.5 blocks per game.
Yeah.
Shooting pretty efficiently. His 3-point shot wasn't really there, but still, the big thing is Chet Holmgren is back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's all you can say for the Thunder. I mean, obviously, we're going to talk about some other guys, but if we ended it there, we could get away with that.
Right.
But Jared Butler, Caleb, I know he's a guy you had in fantasy last year. And a couple of years ago, we made a big trade. Do you remember this?
Yep. You gave me Domantas Sabonis for free, basically. And then I think that other pick, because we had to do the league realignment, that other draft pick you gave me was Josh Giddey. So if you ask me, it turned out to be a good trade, but I can't believe Utah let that guy go. I mean, 20 points per game in 4 games played, shooting 48% on 7.3 3-point attempts. And Butler was he's a very good high IQ player when he played for Baylor. He was the point guard for him for a national championship team. Like him and Davion Mitchell were the guys. And I know there was like some health concerns that caused him to drop, and just plus 2 his age, which that's such a big deal back then. Now, not so much if you need guys who can play right away now, but they just keep stocking on all these. Even Trey Mann, he only played 1 game in this current summer league, but in the first one, he played all 3 games, averaged 23.7 points per game, led the Salt Lake section of it in scoring. So there's so many asses. Even I know too, Michael Rappaport, as he would say, Usman Guzman, or as we know, Usman Jang. He had a solid summer league too. The only underwhelming one for me was Cason Wallace, just because I know he struggled with his shot a little bit, and then just that was pretty much the big thing I had for him coming out of college, was just his shooting was not there. He pretty much single-handedly lost the game against Michigan State, not once but twice within that game, just because of shooting struggling alone. But he's still someone who's also very young, and in my opinion was one of the best on-ball defenders in college basketball last year at the guard position. So it's just, we keep going back. They have all of these young players now, and they could make any kind of move with all these draft picks, or let all these guys come back for another year, get another year to develop now. And they were a play-in team last year. Who knows? They could jump up even with a healthy Chet.
Yeah, I think they're easily going to jump up. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has the potential to be an MVP this year. especially with the jump that team could make. But dang, they have so many assets. That's something like 30 something picks in the next few years. It's insane to see what they're doing, especially now that they have Usman Jang, who has played a really big role. And he's someone last episode I wanted to go in depth on about, but we just didn't have time for that. But they have so much, and there's so many different possibilities. It makes me sad for every other rebuilding team out there, because by the time OKC kind of hits their full strength, I don't think they're going to be losing much. I think they're potential dynasty, not because of the
Yeah.
players have now, but because of the players that they are able to get. Who knows? Maybe none of them will be there when they win their first chip, but probably Shea will be. But other than that, I mean, they have so many different scenarios that they could go with.
I watched the guard Jalen Williams play that first game with Chet. I was just super excited because I just wanted to see Chet for the first time, which he delivered in that first game too. But even like the other Jalen Williams took last year, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, who also played a lot of
Yeah.
forward minutes for them, who was a former high second round pick. They just played one game in summer league, but still they have all these young players. They can go a bunch of different routes.
I'm not excited to see how good they're going to be, but if I was an OKC fan, I would be so excited. And
Oh yeah.
we're going to kind of move to the opposite end of the spectrum. We've been talking about some of these winners, guys who have come out even better looking than we thought coming in. And we're going to move on to the losers of Summer League, teams that underachieved, teams that kind of, there's some where we probably expected it to be this way.
Yeah.
But for the most part, there's just going to be teams that we were left kind of speechless. And we're going to leave the worst for last. But we're going to start with Orlando. They were 0-5. There was not a lot of players out there for them. At least it felt like there was just not a lot of good basketball being played. Anthony Black, that first game against Detroit, I was very high on his performance there. But I think Anthony Black's a guy that kind of strives off of playing with other good players and being in a high IQ system to where it wasn't great. It wasn't great, Caleb. I'm not going to lie to you. Wasn't a great 3-point shooter. Didn't shoot well from the field. 4-4 assist to turnover ratio. Yeah.
Which that exposed those weaknesses exposed there. Obviously, the shooting is one thing, but the 4-4 assists. I mean, who else did he have on his team that are going to be on the Magic's? Like Caleb Houston and Jet Howard, and I'll get to those two in a sec because I know I'll get to those Michigan guys soon. But yeah, Anthony Black for the most part, it's like you mentioned, when he's not with a team of like solid players, and yeah, he's going to have some passing and struggles with all of that. But just to see what he's already done so far, I mean, like you say, he's such a big athlete. He averaged 8.7 rebounds a game still, had 2 steals per game. So the defensive presence is obviously there. But just moving on to the two other guys who are essentially clones of each other, Caleb Houston and Jet Howard. Well, not so much clones because to me, Caleb Houston is someone you just forget about. And he's not, Caleb Houston played only 2 games. He had 15 points per game, shot 40, 33%, 87% splits. And then Jet Howard had 13.3 points per game in 3 games, had 38.5, 40, 66% splits. But Caleb Houston, to me, is just probably one of the most forgettable players ever because all the guy does is just shoot. He doesn't do anything else. Where on the polar opposite side, all Jet Howard does is shoot. But you notice when Jet Howard shoots because of the high volume shots that he took, he was pretty much tied for first with a guy named Kevon Harris. Only played 1 game, but he was first place on the team for most shots attempt, 13 shots per game, was only averaging 5 makes per game. And to me, I look at those two guys, if their shots aren't falling, what else do they bring to the floor for the team? Like if they don't, they're both great, they have great length, great athleticism, but if they're not playing defense or making plays for others, then I don't see where they get a whole lot of minutes in Orlando.
Yeah, I feel the same way about looking kind of at Toronto. They were kind of left with this team that there's not going to be anybody on their team in the actual NBA except for Grady Dick. And just they were running play after play for Grady Dick, and that's all they were doing out of timeouts was setting him up. And good to know that it won't be the Grady Dick show in Toronto. for the actual NBA team. He'll be able to play a little bit of an easier role, just running off screens, catch and shoot threes. But that was kind of a loser team for me as well. I just wanted to put that in there. We didn't have them written down. But a similar way to Orlando, how it's just there's not a lot for them there.
No, and Toronto too. That's glad you mentioned that because I mean there was Marquise Noel who, although he was great in college, really struggled in the NBA, especially against the Pistons. I really got flustered when Marcus Sasser was playing against him the whole time. But yeah, like you said, they didn't really have a whole lot of guys there that were. I mean, I know Delano Banton, a former guy for them. He was playing now for the Boston Celtics.
Mm-hmm.
I know they used to have Champagne at 1.2. One of the brothers, I think it was Justin, but he's no longer there. And then also too, I can't believe like Christian Coloco, their second round center from last year, didn't play.
Yeah.
But you just look at this team, which they do have Ron Harper from Rutgers. I'm not sure if he was undrafted. Yeah, I think he was undrafted, but I think he was like one of their two-way guys last year
Mm-hmm.
who did play for them. But yeah, just like you mentioned, just a lack of players for them.
Yeah. And I think that's going to bring us into our next team, who I think is also similar in that regard. And I think that's kind of the theme for these losers is you're kind of just surrounding guys who are already not that great with talent that's not that great. It's kind of like what year was that Charlotte Hornets team that was the worst of all time?
That was the lockout season when they only won like 9 games or
2011,
whatever.
right?
Yes,
Yeah, I
they
think
were
that was
like
2011.
9-51 or however many games there were.
Yeah, that reminds me of some of these summer league teams. Is you just don't have a lot of NBA guys out there. I mean, you have a lot of guys who will probably be great in the G League, but man, and that brings me to the Warriors.
Oh yes.
So Brandon Podds was a guy I looked at, and a lot of people talked really high about him. He just didn't show me anything. I mean, I listened to a lot of podcasts about him, and I was expecting him to come out and just be one of those great steals for Golden State. I was very disappointed.
Yeah, Brandon really struggled with his shot. Not so
Mm-hmm.
much in that first round of games because the Warriors were in one of those early pre games too. But
Mm-hmm.
over 5 games, look at his stats: 11.4 field goal attempts, made 26%, 4.6 3-point attempts when he's a 3-point shooter specialist.
Yeah,
And he's only shooting
exactly.
four attempts, 21%. It must be for that thing. When I see that, it's like mostly a confidence thing at that point.
Yeah.
Or if your shots aren't going down, your shot attempts is going to go down as well. But they just, like you mentioned too. So the big thing with me with the Warriors was they just really missed out. I mean, obviously Trace Jackson Davis was the guy I was excited to really see, which he only played 2 games due to injury, but was very good in just 22 minutes a game. Averaged 16 points, 8.5 rebounds, 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks per game, shooting pretty efficient too from the floor. But it was just one of those things we missed out on. We couldn't have seen Trace Jackson Davis in 7 games instead of 2. But just looking too at their young core, I mean, this was a team that once had Patrick Baldwin Jr., who was a former draft pick last year. Very, very interesting situation with him, with how things went with going to play for his dad, Milwaukee, not having a great season, getting hurt for the year. And then Ryan Rollins from Toledo, who was one of the best mid-major players, was drafted 40th overall last year. They sent both of those guys for no reason for Chris Paul when
Yeah, with Jordan Poole.
They probably didn't have to do that. They could have just sent picks in Jordan Poole, but I don't know why they would have done that. They should have kept those guys, give them a chance. And I've seen a lot of stuff with their guy, Lester Quiones, leads the team in scoring. But when you really look into his shooting splits, they're not the most prettiest either. But the Warriors, to me, is just a team that I feel, just going outside of Summer League, is they're not taking advantage of their young players when they're doing a good job drafting young players, but they're not doing anything with them.
Yeah, I see both sides to it because
Yeah.
when you look at what Golden State needs to do is they need to capitalize on their core of Curry,
Mm-hmm.
Clay, and Dre. And they were really trying to do that 2 timelines thing. And they won a championship during the 2 timelines thing. But then people realize is that none of those guys really played any meaningful minutes. Wiseman didn't play much during that finals.
No.
He was hurt. Then you look at Kuminga, very limited role. Moody didn't play much. It didn't really work. And
Yeah.
it's a thing where I agree with them capitalizing on having some of these young guys and moving them for talent, but for CP3 alone doesn't really make sense for me. I'm curious
No.
if you could have distributed these players out a little bit differently and you could have came away with 2 or 3 high quality role players.
I will say when they gave Moody some playoff minutes too, and I thought they could have really used Kaminga against some of those wings. Just like you
Mhm.
mentioned, they just aren't really figuring out the young guys well. I mean, who knows now with a new front office, whatever. But essentially, it's all about Steph, Dre, and Clay. I
Yeah.
mean, that was kind of a big thing too, why Jordan Poole got moved off. But at the same time, you have to look at the Warriors right now. Like, are they going to be good enough again to compete? Like, can they compete now against a rejuvenated Lakers roster, especially? Can they beat the Nuggets? I mean, they have to figure out something, I think, with Steph yet. I know, and just giving away, like you said, young assets for not really a lot in return. I mean, I just don't know what they're doing, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, and that brings us to the last loser of the night, and that is the Charlotte Hornets. Team that went out there without any point guard. And when you have a guy like Brandon Miller, a top draft pick, I feel like the goal of Summer League is to put them out there where they can be the guy, but also not have to be the only guy. And he had the ball in his hands a little too much for my liking, especially when you have a LaMelo Ball and a Terry Rozier on your main team. Maybe they should have made it more like a simulation of what's going to happen. So maybe they should have brought in some other ball handlers that were LaMelo light to maybe have them feel. I don't know. I just don't know what their game plan was. Kobe Simmons led their team in assists at 5.5, but he only played 2 games. The next highest was 3.5 assists a game. So that shows me that there were not a lot of guys who were willing to or really able to move the rock in an effective way. Kind of led Brandon Miller to struggle in a few of those games. Of course, he blew up a little bit, but I mean, you're not putting him in any situation to succeed.
Well, they went 1-6 overall between all the games they played. I can tell you right now, Nick Smith, James Bouknight, Bryce McGowens, and Amari Bailey are not giving anything to Brandon Miller. They're going to be guys who go get their own shots. In which, too, I don't really understand. Like, my first thing I want to talk about is Bouknight. I mean, you
Yeah.
talk about 11th overall pick in 2021. In his 3rd season now playing Summer League, still trying to find his footing, had the one huge game.
Mm-hmm.
But still, for the most part, shooting splits are 38%, 27% from 3. He's struggled a bit. Nick Smith didn't really have the most ideal shooting numbers. Bryce McGowens didn't really either. And then I just feel like Amari Bailey just didn't get enough look because they had those 3 guys trying to find their own. The last game Amari Bailey played, he was pretty good, but in reality, they have all these shooting guards already trying to play, and that just takes away from Brandon Miller. I mean, credit, he still averaged 17 a game over 3 games. Maybe not so ideal shots, but Brandon Miller's thing for what made him so good last year as a shooter is he was a catch and shoot guy. Like you talk about LaMelo Ball when he's together with
Mm-hmm.
Brandon, it'll be better. I mean, last year he had guys like Javon Quinterly and Mark Sears, 2 very high IQ players, very good creators for other getting Brandon open shots, which that's going to be his bread and butter. But still, I just look at this young core. I mean, even too, like Kai Jones played 3 games. Kai Jones is still in the summer league like 3 years later after being a first round pick, still developing. They even brought in James Najee too,
Yeah.
who was 31st overall, I believe, this year, and he is just someone made a perfect example. Like he's just a wrecking ball. He's just a physical force of energy that just goes around to the court. Bullies Wemby a little bit. That's pretty much all you need him to do with the no foul limit.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really understand it either because, like we mentioned, Kai Jones is still a project. They got Mark Williams. They got Nick Richards. It doesn't seem they're giving them up. They're not giving up PJ Washington. So I don't know. Charlotte, maybe this is the new post MJ era, but they've just got all of these young guys that still seem like they're trying to just find their way. And then I
Yeah.
don't know if the light at the end of the tunnel is getting any closer or not.
Yeah. I look at Brandon Miller. I know I said earlier that maybe they didn't set him up the best,
No, they
but
did not.
maybe there is a positive to it. And I think summer league is a time to experiment. And if you're going to experiment at any point, do it where the stats will not matter in 5 years from now.
Right.
I mean, he didn't shoot the ball well. What did he shoot from 3? 26% as a 3-point shooter. In 5 years, no one will remember that. And if they do, it will be a, hey, fun fact. Did you know Brandon Miller, all-star right now, shot 26% from 3? I mean, no one's really going to care about that. No one's going to hold that against his legacy. And giving him this opportunity to just kind of be the guy, have the ball in his hands, try to create for himself, especially when that was one of his biggest
Mhm.
critiques coming into the draft. So giving him that opportunity to grow might help him, and he might have that Jabari Smith sort of year where he kind of struggles a little bit because he needs to find his shots and improve in some of those on-ball reps. But after getting a lot of that and coming into Summer League next year, I'm expecting something big from him if he plays.
Yeah, I can't really guarantee if a top 3 pick, top 2 pick is gonna play next year. I should just say second overall at this point. But, yeah, I don't know. It's weird because you wanna see Charlotte with these young guys take a step forward, and yet it just seems like some of them really aren't. They're still stuck where they are, and it just makes me wonder, like, when you put this into the real I mean, these guys are all gonna be rotation guys most likely. I mean, I look at Charlotte's team next year, and I don't see why they are not gonna be the 15th worst team in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean,
There's
look at people saw Washington and thought they could be, but I don't know. I watched Washington's team. Their young guys look pretty promising. Plus, you got Kuzma and Poole and Tyus Jones. I mean, I
yeah,
don't see how
that's
that
a
team
good
is.
core.
I don't see how that team's worse than what Charlotte has.
I mean, they're better than what they were last year, to be
Yeah,
completely honest. In a way, in a
in a
weird,
way,
sick way.
yeah.
Obviously, there's Beal and well, maybe not. Maybe I spoke too soon about that one. But I mean, Beal barely plays. Porzingis is hurt all the time. At least they're going to have guys that are probably going to be out there 70 plus games if they want them to be. I'm not saying they're going to fight for the play-in, but I don't think they're going to be dead last. I think that's
No,
between Charlotte and I saw a stat the other day that there's always on average 5 teams that win less than 20 games every season. So there's a team, or maybe it was less than 25 games a season. And I feel like everyone I see that projects what the standings are going to be, there's no team under 25. So there's generally going to have to be 5 of them, and I wouldn't be surprised if an Orlando happens to fall for some reason.
mhm.
Detroit might fall. You look at some of those Western Conference younger teams like Utah, San Antonio, Houston. There's going to be surprises, and I think people just need to be ready for it because there has to be 5.
And there's gonna be some. I think this could be a tough, different time, but like a self-destruct possible team, or
Mm.
just blow everything up. I think Toronto and Chicago in the East are the 2 teams, in my opinion, that are teams that could totally go a different way. Atlanta's not getting rid of Trey Young anytime soon, but they got so many young guys they could just ship them all out, and then they have no depth or anything, and they just keep creating themselves a new problem. But
Mhm.
that's just always too. Even too, I think the Clippers are a team too that could just totally self-combust. I don't know why, just for all the injuries and stuff. But
Yeah, they don't have any assets going forward, so they kind of have to. If they don't think they're going to get anywhere, they almost have to blow it up. But it's hard because they have that new arena. So how I just can't see them blowing it up. But at the same time, they're going to open this new arena and have Paul George and Kawhi play 50 games each, and then lose them for nothing, and then have the worst team for the next 10 years. Then you lose money on your arena. Like I don't see how any of that's going to work out. But Caleb, my
yeah,
computer is not charging, even though it's plugged in, and we're sitting at 5%. So it's going to die very soon. So this is where we're going to end the pod today. I know we were going to talk about a little bit more. So maybe next week we can talk a little bit more on why I thought Atlanta was a loser. We can talk about some of the honorable mentions from this. But hey, we're buttoned up right at 60 minutes. So it almost seems like this was planned, but it was not. But Caleb, Summer League was fun this year. It always is fun for me. I like seeing this. And like I said, 5 years from now, a lot of the stuff isn't going to matter at all.
yeah,
So even a year from now, Caleb, we're going to listen back to this episode and we're going to call ourselves crazy. So
yep. I guarantee there'll be some guys where it's like, I don't even know where to start because I can tell there's going to be someone. I'm still thinking that Maxwell Lewis is going to be Max Christie again next year. That's going to be my guy who's going to rise up, I think.
yeah, looking through, I don't know who's my pick for that right now. I'd like to think someone from Orlando because that was bad. Someone from Charlotte, maybe because that was bad. So if
Yeah.
safe pick are from the losers we just talked about. But again, Caleb, thanks for joining us. This was a great time. And everyone who's listening, make sure you check out some of our past episodes. We'll continue to upload. We're going to get moving more into the scouting for the 24 draft very soon. Hope you all have a great night, morning, evening, whatever time it is for you. Peace out.